Welcome to my channel. This is Captain Binoy Varakil, Assistant Professor, Department of English, St. Joseph School at Demerits, Kozhikode. We continue our discussion of language and linguistics, the course for 5th semester BA students of the colleges of University of Calicut. We have so far discussed three important topics in three lectures, and those lectures are on phrase, clause and sentence, coordination and subordination. In this lecture, in the fourth lecture in this series, we discuss some syntactic models, and we have many syntactic models, and the first important syntactic model is the very traditional grammar. We will discuss the significance of traditional grammar today, and before that, let's understand what we mean by syntactic models. Syntactic models are approaches to the study of syntax. Syntax is the study of sentences, and syntactic models refers to the study of sentences and the constituents of sentences. This kind of a study, that is syntactic models, helps us to understand each and every component or constituent of sentences in the English language. And as I said, there are different approaches, and some of the approaches or syntactic models for the study of the constituents of sentence are traditional grammar, structural or descriptive grammar, immediate constituent analysis, phrase structure grammar, and transformational generative grammar. In different lectures, we will discuss all the five syntactic models. Today's lecture, we look at traditional grammar. We know that there are various kinds of grammars. And what do we mean by traditional grammar? Traditional grammar is basically the Aristotelian orientation toward the nature of language as exemplified in the work of ancient Greeks and Romans. The traditional grammar has a long tradition behind it. There are ideas about sentence structure deriving from Aristotle and Plato, ideas about the part of speech deriving from the Stoic grammarians. There are ideas about meaning stemming from the scholastic debates of the Middle Ages, ideas about the relationship between language and mind from the 17th century philosophical controversies between rationalists and empiricists, ideas about correctness in language coming from the 18th century grammar of English, and ideas about the history of language deriving from the 19th century emphasis on comparative philology. In fact, it's a very vast area for discussion, but let us just discuss the most significant concepts in traditional grammar. Traditional grammar refers to the grammatical concepts and methods before course in General Linguistics 1915. And we know that course in General Linguistics is the very text that contain all the ideas of Ferdinand de Saussure. The rules of traditional grammar were mainly an inheritance from the Latin-based grammar of the previous centuries, and scholars like Ben Jonson were deeply learned in classical languages like Greek and Latin. They conceived of the classical languages as superior to the vernaculars. So traditional grammar is the most widespread and influential method of discussing languages in the world, fairly well understood and consistently applied by teachers. Traditional grammar distinguishes between rational, emotional, automatic, and purely conventional type of discourse in theory, if not in grammatical practice. It gives fairly a thorough and consistent analysis of the declarative sentence. It's the vehicle by means of which ordinary students and scholars have mastered many languages for centuries. In the words of Noam Chomsky, quotation, I think that we have much to learn from the careful study of what was achieved by the universal grammarians of the 17th and 18th centuries. It seems to me, in fact, that contemporary linguists would do well to take their concept of English as a point of departure for current work. Not only do they make a fairly clear and well-founded distinction between deep and surface structures, but they also go on to study the nature of deep structure and provide valuable hints and insights concerning the rules that relate the abstract underlying mental structures to surface from the rules that we would now call grammatical transformations. So this is the very words of Chomsky, who is championing the transformative generative grammar. Traditional grammarians formulated the rules of English based on Latin, and traditional grammarians neglected the distinction between the notions of form, function, and meaning. Hence, the definition of the parts of speech or word classes was incomplete and unsatisfactory. Traditional grammar ignored the aspects of phonology. It did not make any attempt to analyze the sentence into its phonological structure. It did not give any significance to the suprasegmentals or prosodic features such as stress, intonation, rhythm, juncture. The traditional grammarians laid down rules of do's and don'ts instead of describing the behavior of the language. Hence, the traditional grammar is prescriptive rather than descriptive. And we also have to understand the fact that traditional grammar has some weakness. What are the weaknesses of traditional grammar? Traditional grammar is inadequate and full of shortcomings. If it had been adequate and perfect, there would have been no necessity of so many models of modern grammar. Traditional grammar is based mainly on Indo-European classical languages. It's a poor model for the grammars of languages that differ from Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, etc. It does not adequately distinguish between all the linguistic levels: phonetic, morphological, syntactic, and semantic. It neglects not only the contemporary usage but also the functional and social varieties of language. Its approach is historical or diachronic rather than synchronic or contemporary. It tries to study a living language like a dead language. In the structure of English, Fries, the linguist, challenges traditional grammar by calling them not insightful, pre-scientific, prescriptive, and having a literary bias. Traditional grammar are full of inadequacies. There may be about 200 definitions of the sentences, yet they are not able to differentiate between the dog is barking and the barking dog. Traditional grammar says that a noun is the name of a person, place, or a thing. It cannot include blue and red in the list of nouns, although they are the names of colors. Traditional grammar uses meaning as the primary tool of linguistic analysis. Total meaning of a language utterance cannot be analyzed in the present stage of our knowledge. Meaning is a complex entity for the understanding of which a formal description of language should form the base. Furthermore, traditional grammar fails to indicate clearly which meaning it is going to treat: social meaning, linguistic meaning, lexical meaning, structural meaning, notional meaning, referential meaning, or contextual meaning. Traditional grammar always gives priority to the written form of language and ignores the notion that spoken form is prior to the written form. The traditional grammar does not have an adequate notion of a linguistic rule. It appeals only to intuition. The rules are not adequate and wholesome. The learner has to use his own common sense or judgment in matters of unstated rules. Traditional grammar concentrates on giving rules and defining terms, but its rules and definitions are not satisfactory, nor are they scientifically sound. To quote John Lyons, the traditional grammarian tended to assume not only that the written language was more fundamental than the spoken, but also that a particular form of the written language, namely the literary language, was inherently purer and more correct than all other forms of the language, written and spoken, and it was his task as a grammarian to preserve this form of the language from corruption. In short, traditional grammar is informal, unscientific, illogical, full of contradictions and inconsistencies, inexplicit, inadequate, prescriptive, uneconomical, unmethodical, and unwholesome. It lacks scientific accuracy, objectivity, precision. It ignores the contemporary usage and all the varieties of language. With that, we can come to the end of this lecture on traditional grammar. Thank you very much for listening.